Welcome to Thueringer or Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris, Chapter 5. A few moments later, he rode out of the barn and the stable yard, a fresh cigar between his teeth, his hat slanted over his face against the rays of the sun as he ate low in the east. He crossed the irrigating ditch and gained the trail, the shortcut over into Los Muertos by way of Huvens. It led south and west into the low ground overgrown by gray-green willows by Broderson Creek. At this time of the rainy season, a stream of considerable volume, farther on dipping sharply to pass underneath the long trestle of the railroad. On the other side of the right-of-way, Annixter was obliged to open the gate into Eric's line fence. He managed this without dismounting, swearing at the horse the while and spurring him continually. But once inside the gate, he cantered forward briskly. This part of Los Muertos was Huvens' holding, some 500 acres enclosed between the irrigating ditch and Broderson Creek, and half the way across Annixter came up with Hooven himself, busily at work replacing a broken washer in his cedar. Upon one of the horses hitched to the machine, her hands gripped tightly upon the harness of the collar, Hilda, his little daughter, with her small hobnailed boots and boy's canvas overalls, sat, exalted and petrified with ecstasy and excitement, her eyes wide open, her hair in a tangle. "Hello, Bismarck," said Annixter, drawing up beside him. "What are you doing here? I thought the governor was going to manage without his tenants this year." "Ah, Mr. Annixter," cried the other, straightening up. "Ah, that's you, eh? Ah, you bet he don't manage without me. Me, I got to stay. I talk der straight talk mit der governor. I fix him. Ah, you bet. 7 year I have by der ranch gestopped. Yes, sir. Every other son of a gun by der place get der sack but me. Eh? What you think von those things?" "I think that's a crazy-looking monkey wrench you've got there," observed Annixter, glancing at the instrument in Hooven's hand. "Ach, what a wrench," returned Hooven. "So, well, I tell you those things now where I got them. Say, you see that wrench? That's not American wrench at all. I got them at gravel out there day we licked for stuffing out der French. Ah, you bet. Me, I belong to der Wurmberg regiment. Thought they used to support their battery on der Prince von Hohenzollern. All of der day we lay down by der stomach in der field behind der battery, and under shells von der French cannon have explode. Och, Donnerwetter. I think every shell explode by der backside my neck. And that go on der whole day, nothing else. Nothing aber the French now, brr 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 bram under smoke and under battery that go off slow, steady, just like der Glock. Ein, zwei, boom! Ein, zwei, boom! Just like der Glock. Over and over again all of their day. Then, when der night come, they say we have the great victory made. I don't know. What do I see von der battle? Nothing. And then we get up and march all night, and in der morgen we hear those cannon again, hell of der way, far off. I don't know far. But never mind. Pretty quick and got his face flamed scarlet. Ach, die lieber Gott. Pretty soon, there was der Kaiser, close by, and Fritz, unser Fritz. By God, and I go crazy and yell, "Och, you bet, their whole regiment. Hoch, der Kaiser. Hoch, der Vaterland." And their tears come to their eyes. I don't know why, and their men cry and shake their hand, and their whole regiment mark off like that. Very proud, by God, their head up high, and saying they walked am Rhein. Das was gravelet. And the monkey wrench? I pick 'em up when their battery go. Their cannoneers have forget and leave 'em. I carry 'em in their sack. I think I use 'em when I get home in their business. I was maker van wagons in Karlsruhe, and I never get home again. When their war have got over, I go back to home and get married, and then I get them sick on their army. When I get their release, I clear out, you bet. I come to America. First to New York, then Milwaukee, then Springfield, Illinois, then California, and there I stay. And the fatherland, ever want to go back? Well, I tell you those things, Mr. Annixter. Always I think a lot of Germany under Kaiser, and never I forget Gravelot. But I tell you those things. Where their wife is, under Kinder, their little girl Hilda, there is their Vaterland, eh? America. That's my country now, and there, he pointed behind him to the house under the mammoth oak tree on the lower road. That's my home. That's good enough Vaterland for me. Annixter gathered up the reins, about to go on. So you like America, do you, Bismarck? He said. Who do you vote for? America? I don't know, returned the other insistently. That's my home yonder. That's my Vaterland. All of on with Shermans, just like that. Germany, that's hell of some fine place, sure. But their Vaterland is where their home and their wife and their kinder is. Eh? Yes? Vote? Ach, no. Me, I never vote. I don't bother their head with those things. I make their wheat grow and get the bread for my wife and Hilda. That's all. That's me. That's Bismarck. Goodbye, commented Annixter, moving off. Hooven, the washer replaced, turning to his work again, started up the horses. The cedar advanced, whirring. Ah, Hilda, little girl, he cried. Hold tight by the strap-on. Hey, mule, hoop, get up, you. Annixter cantered on. In a few moments he had crossed Broderson Creek and had entered upon the home ranch of Los Muertos. Ahead of him, but so far off that the greater portion of its bulk was below the horizon, he could see the Derricks' home, a roof or two between the dull green of cypress and eucalyptus. Nothing else was in sight. The brown earth, smooth, unbroken, was as a limitless mud-colored ocean. The silence was profound. Then in length, Annixter's searching eye made out a blur on the horizon to the northward. The blur concentrated itself to a speck. The speck grew by steady degrees to a spot, slowly moving, a note of dull color, barely darker than the land, but an inky black silhouette as it topped a low rise of ground and stood for a moment outlined against the pale blue of the sky. Annixter turned his horse from the road and rode across the ranch land to meet this new object of interest. As the spot grew larger, it resolved itself into constituents, a collection of units. Its shape grew irregular, fragmentary. A disintegrated, nebulous confusion advanced toward Annixter, preceded, as he discovered on nearer approach, by a medley of faint sounds. Now it was no longer a spot, but a column that moved, accompanied by spots. As Annixter lessened the distance, these spots resolved themselves into buggies or men on horseback that kept pace with the advancing column. There were horses in the column itself. At first glance, it appeared as if there were nothing else, a riderless squadron tramping steadily over the upturned plowland of the ranch. But it drew nearer. The horses were in lines, 6 abreast, harnessed to machines. The noise increased to find itself. There was a shout or two. Occasionally a horse blew through his nostrils with a prolonged, vibrating snort. The click and clink of metal work was incessant, the machines throwing off a continual rattle of wheels and cogs and clashing springs. The column approached nearer, was close at hand. The noises mingled to a subdued uproar, a bewildering confusion. The impact of innumerable hoofs was a veritable rumble. Machine after machine appeared, and Annixter, drawing to one side, remained for nearly 10 minutes, watching and interested, while, like an array of chariots, clattering, jostling, creaking, clashing, an interminable procession, machine succeeding machine, 6-horse team succeeding 6-horse team, bustling, hurried. Magnus de Eric's 33 grain drills, each with its 8 hoes, went clamoring past, like an advance of military, seeding the 10,000 acres of the great ranch, fecundating the living soil, implanting deep in the dark womb of the earth the germ of life, the sustenance of a whole world, the food of an entire people. When the drills had passed, Annixter turned and rode back to the lower road, over the land now thick with seed. He did not wonder that the seeding on Los Muertos seemed to be hastily conducted. Magnus and Herron Derrick had not yet been able to make up the time lost at the beginning of the season, when they had waited so long for the plows to arrive. They had been behindhand all the time. On Annixter's ranch, the land had not only been harrowed as well as seeded, but in some cases cross-harrowed as well. The labor of putting in the vast crop was over. Now there was nothing to do but wait while the seed silently germinated, nothing to do but watch for the wheat to come up. When Annixter reached the ranch house of Los Muertos under the shade of the cypress and eucalyptus trees, he found Mrs. Derrick on the porch, seated in a long wicker chair. She had been washing her hair, and the light brown locks that yet retained so much of their brightness were carefully spread in the sun over the back of her chair. Annixter could not but remark that, in spite of her more than 50 years, Annie Derrick was yet rather pretty. Her eyes were still those of a young girl, just touched with an uncertain expression of innocence and inquiry. But as her glance fell upon him, he found that expression changed to one of uneasiness, of distrust, almost aversion. The night before this, after Magnus and his wife had gone to bed, they had lain awake for hours, staring up into the dark, talking. Magnus had not long been able to keep from his wife the news of the coalition that was forming against the railroad, nor the fact that this coalition was determined to gain its ends by any means at its command. He had told her of Osterman's scheme of a fraudulent election to seat a board of railroad commissioners who should be nominees of the farming interests. Magnus and his wife had talked this matter over and over again, and the same discussion, begun immediately after supper the evening before, had lasted till far into the night. At once Annie Derrick had been seized with a sudden terror lest Magnus, after all, should allow himself to be persuaded, should yield to the pressure that was every day growing stronger. None better than she knew the iron integrity of her husband's character. None better than she remembered how his dearest ambition, that of political preferment, had been thwarted by his refusal to truckle, to connive, to compromise with his ideas of right. Now at the last there seemed to be a change. Long continued oppression, petty tyranny, injustice, and extortion had driven him to exasperation. As Behrman's insults still rankled, he seemed nearly ready to countenance Osterman's scheme. The very fact that he was willing to talk of it to her so often and at such great length was proof positive that it occupied his mind. The pity of it, the tragedy of it. He, Magnus, the governor, who had been so staunch, so rigidly upright, so loyal to his convictions, so bitter in his denunciation of the new politics, so scathing in his attacks on bribery and corruption in high places. Was it possible that now at last he could be brought to withhold his condemnation of the devious intrigues of the unscrupulous going on there under his very eyes? That Magnus could not command Heron to refrain from all intercourse with the conspirators had been a matter of vast surprise to Mrs. Derrick. Time was when Magnus would have forbidden his son to so much as recognize a dishonorable man. But besides all this, Derrick's wife trembled at the thought of her husband and son engaging in so desperate a grapple with the railroad. That great monster, iron-hearted, relentless, infinitely powerful. Always it had issued triumphant from the fight. Always S. Behrman, the corporation's champion, remained upon the field as victor, placid, unperturbed, unassailable. But now a more terrible struggle than any hitherto loomed menacing over the rim of the future. Money was to be spent like water. Personal reputations were to be hazarded in the issue. Failure meant ruin in all directions. Financial ruin, moral ruin, ruin of prestige, ruin of character. Success, to her mind, was almost impossible. Annie Derrick feared the railroad. At night, when everything else was still, the distant roar of passing trains echoed across Los Muertos, from Guadalajara, from Bonneville, or from the long trestle straight into her heart. At such moments, she saw very plainly the galloping terror of steam and steel with its single eye, cyclopean, red, shooting from horizon to horizon, symbol of a vast power, huge and terrible. The Leviathan with tentacles of steel to oppose, which meant to be ground to instant destruction beneath the clashing wheels. No, it was better to submit, to resign oneself to the inevitable. She obliterated herself, shrinking from the harshness of the world, striving with vain hands to draw her husband back with her. Just before Annixter's arrival, she had been sitting, thoughtful, in her long chair, an open volume of poems turned down upon her lap, her glance losing itself in the immensity of Los Muertos that, from the edge of the lawn close by, unrolled itself, gigantic, toward the far southern horizon, wrinkled and serrated after the season's plowing. The earth, hitherto gray with dust, was now upturned and brown. As far as the eye could reach, it was empty of all life, bare, mournful, absolutely still. And as she looked, there seemed to her morbid imagination, diseased and disturbed with long brooding, sick with the monotony of repeated sensation, to be disengaged from all this immensity, a sense of vast oppression, formless, disquieting. The terror of sheer bigness grew slowly in her mind. Loneliness beyond words gradually enveloped her. She was lost in all these limitless reaches of space. Had she been abandoned in mid-ocean in an open boat, her terror could hardly have been greater. She felt vividly that certain uncongeniality which, when all is said, forever remains between humanity and the earth which supports it. She recognized the colossal indifference of nature, not hostile, even kindly and friendly, so long as the human ant swarm was submissive, working with it, hurrying along at its side in the mysterious march of the centuries. Let, however, the insect rebel, strive to make head against the power of this nature, and at once it became relentless, a gigantic engine of vast power, huge, terrible. A leviathan with a heart of steel, knowing no compunction, no forgiveness, no tolerance, crushing out the human atom with soundless calm. The agony of destruction sending never a jar, never the faintest tremor through all that prodigious mechanism of wheels and cogs. Such thoughts as these did not take shape distinctly in her mind. She could not have told herself exactly what it was that disquieted her. She only received the vague sensation of these things, as it were a breath of wind upon her face, confused, troublous, an indefinite sense of hostility in the air. The sound of hoofs grinding upon the gravel of the driveway brought her to herself again, and, withdrawing her gaze from the empty plain of Los Muertos, she saw young Annixter stopping his horse by the carriage steps. But the sight of him only diverted her mind to the other trouble. She could not but regard him with aversion. He was one of the conspirators, was one of the leaders in the battle that impended. No doubt he had come to make a fresh attempt to win over Magnus to the unholy alliance. However, there was a little trace of enmity in her greeting. Her hair was still spread like a broad patch of back, and she made that her excuse for not getting up. In answer to Annixter's embarrassed inquiry after Magnus, she sent the Chinese cook to call him from the office. And Annixter, after tying his horse to the ring driven into the trunk of one of the eucalyptus trees, came up to the porch, and taking off his hat, sat down upon the steps. "Is Heron anywhere about?" he asked. "I'd like to see Heron, too." "No," said Mrs. Derrick. "Heron went to Bonneville early this morning." She glanced toward Annixter nervously, without turning her head, lest she should disturb her outspread hair. "What is it you want to see Mr. Derrick about?" she inquired hastily. "Is it about this plan to elect a railroad commission? Magnus does not approve of it, she declared with energy. "He told me so last night." Annixter moved about awkwardly where he sat, smoothing down with his hand the one stiff lock of yellow hair that persistently stood up from his crown like an Indian scalp lock. At once his suspicions were all aroused. This female woman was trying to get a hold on him, trying to involve him in a petticoat mess, trying to cajole him. Upon the instant he became very crafty. An excess of prudence prompted congealed his natural impulses. In an actual spasm of caution, he scarcely trusted himself to speak, terrified lest he should commit himself to something. He glanced about apprehensively, praying that Magnus might join them speedily, relieving the tension. "I came to see about giving a dance in my new barn," he answered, scowling into the depths of his hat, as though reading from notes he had concealed there. "I wanted to ask how I should send out the invites. I thought of just putting an ad in the Mercury." But as he spoke, Presley had come up behind Annixter in time to get the drift of the conversation, and now observed, "That's nonsense, Buck. You're not giving a public ball. You must send out invitations." "Hello, Presley, you there?" exclaimed Annixter, turning around. The two shook hands. "Send out invitations," repeated Annixter uneasily. "Why must I?" "Because that's the only way to do it." "It is it?" answered Annixter, perplexed and troubled. No other man of his acquaintance could have so contradicted Annixter without provoking a quarrel upon the instant. Why the young rancher, irascible, obstinate, belligerent, should invariably defer to the poet was an inconsistency never to be explained. It was with great surprise that Mrs. Derrick heard him continue. "Well, I suppose you know what you're talking about, Press. Must have written invites, eh?" "Of course." "Typewritten?" "Why, what an ass you are, Buck," observed Presley calmly. "Before you get through with it, you will probably insult 3/4 of the people you intend to invite, and have about 100 quarrels on your hands and a lawsuit or two." However, before Annixter could reply, Magnus came out on the porch, erect, grave, freshly shaven. Without realizing what he was doing, Annixter instinctively rose to his feet. It was as though Magnus was a commander-in-chief of an unseen army, and he a subaltern. There was some little conversation as to the proposed dance, and then Annixter found an excuse for drawing the governor aside. Mrs. Derrick watched the two with eyes full of poignant anxiety as they slowly paced the length of the gravel driveway to the road gate and stood there leaning upon it, talking earnestly. Magnus, tall, thin-lipped, impassive, on one hand in the breast of his frock coat, his head bare, his keen blue eyes fixed upon Annixter's face. Annixter came at once to the main point. "I got a wire from Osterman this morning, Governor, and, well, we've got Isparao. That means that the Denver, Pueblo, and Mojave is back of us. There's half the fight won, first off." "Osterman bribed him, I suppose," observed Magnus. Annixter raised a shoulder vexatiously. "You've got to pay for what you get," he returned. "You don't get something for nothing, I guess. Governor," he went on, "I don't see how you can stay out of this business much longer. You see how it will be. We're going to win, and I don't see how you can feel that it's right of you to let us do all the work and stand all the expense. There's never been a movement of any importance that went on around you that you weren't the leader in it. All Tulare County, all the San Joaquin for that matter, knows you. They want a leader, and they are looking to you. I know how you feel about politics nowadays, but, Governor, standards have changed since your time. Everybody plays the game now as we are playing it, the most honorable man. You can't play it any other way, and pshaw, if the right wins out in the end, that's the main thing. We want you in this thing, and we want you bad. You've been chewing on this affair now a long time. Have you made up your mind? Do you come in? I tell you what, you've got to look at these things in a large way. You've got to judge by the results. Well now, what do you think? Do you come in?" Magnus's glance left Annixter's face, and for an instant sought the ground. His frown lowered, but now was in perplexity rather than in anger. His mind was troubled, harassed with 1,000 dissensions. But one of Magnus's strongest instincts, one of his keenest desires, was to be, if only for a short time, the master. To control men had ever been his ambition, submission of any kind his greatest horror. His energy stirred within him, goaded by the lash of his anger, his sense of indignity, of insult. Oh, for one moment to be able to strike back, to crush his enemy, to defeat the railroad, hold the corporation in the grip of his fist, put down S. Behrman, rehabilitate himself, regain his self-respect. To be once more powerful, to command, to dominate. His thin lips pressed themselves together, The nostrils of his prominent hawk-like nose dilated, his erect, commanding figure stiffened unconsciously. For a moment he saw himself controlling the situation, the foremost figure in his state, feared, respected, thousands of men beneath him, his ambition at length gratified, his career once apparently brought to naught completed, success a palpable achievement. What if this were his chance after all, come at last after all these years, his chance? The instincts of the old-time gambler, the most redoubtable poker player of El Dorado County, stirred at the word. Chance. To know it when it came, to recognize it as it passed fleet as a wind flurry, grip at it, catch it, blind, reckless, staking all upon the hazard of the issue, that was genius. Was this his chance? All of a sudden it seemed to him that it was. But his honor, his cherished lifelong integrity, the unstained purity of his principles, at this late date, were they to be sacrificed? Could he now go counter to all the firm-built fabric of his character? How afterward could he bear to look Heron and Lyman in the face? And yet, back swung the pendulum. To neglect his chance meant failure. A life begun in promise and ended in obscurity, perhaps in financial ruin, poverty even. To seize it meant achievement, fame, influence, prestige, possibly great wealth. "I am so sorry to interrupt," said Mrs. Derrick as she came up. "I hope Mr. Annixter will excuse me, but I want Magnus to open the safe for me."